Hey folks, I'm gonna give it another minute or so for a few more people, hopefully, to join us this week. All right, I'm gonna get things started. I just got a message from Jordan. He's not gonna make it today. Sorry, I'm giggling at what he's what he's sending me as a message. He's not having the best day. So yeah, he won't be here today. He will catch up, I guess, in the future. But there's one thing on the agenda that is tangentially related to him, so we can follow up with him after, I guess. Looks like we have a smaller than normal attendance today also. Just muting my notifications so Slack isn't beeping constantly in the background. So last meeting already 2 weeks ago, we talked about trying to tighten up the wording in the header of the KEP, talking about motivations, justification, in scope, out of scope. Donald and I spent some time brainstorming words on that. I did a scrub through of the whole document also versus the current template, trying to highlight some to-dos and tighten up the wording in other parts. I think, Nick, you've given it a read through based on a comment update, maybe?
Yeah. I went through and had a read. There was, I think I made a couple of like super small additions. Something I think I made a small addition in the alternatives bit about if we were going to make the support window even longer, that we need to do all the work that we would need to do to make it 3 months. We'd need to do to make it a longer period. Anyway, I thought that it was good that Josh came back and sort of explained his reasons for being a -1 a bit more as well. It's probably worth talking about that a little bit. So Josh said,
I hadn't actually seen, I got a notification of your comment, but I hadn't gotten a notification of his, so I am behind on reading that.
That's okay, yeah. So basically he's saying that he doesn't think we should extend the support window at all. He thinks we should just pick a version and call that LTS.
It's an interesting proposal.
Yeah, I'm like, that is definitely a proposal.
So I feel like that's roughly Lubomir's proposal and the alternatives.
Yeah, I think so.
I feel like this could be a follow-on. Like I haven't read his full comment, but I feel like if the gist of his initial comment had been like, people want longer support than that, but this is what this initial proposal captures is at least getting people onto a predictable cadence that's corresponds to planning cycles that they're familiar with. I put a picture in also to try to show that more, because
Yeah.
upgrading in April, then January, then October, like that that's going to feel weird to most people, I think. And I think that's the kind of the root of what people were saying without putting it in picture form or those specific words where, oh, I can upgrade every April. I can understand how to do that. And sure, it's better if they do it more often from maybe a community support perspective, but knowing that there are people who don't, April's or whatever you pick your month is better than
Yeah.
every 8 or 9 or 10.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good way to put it. That like this is like it's about making sure that that it aligns to sort of the general planning cycle. Yeah, it feels like a I don't know. Like it feels like that doesn't feel very like worthy of argument. Sorry, it's very early for me. My brain is still not working yet. I really like the diagram though. I think the diagram is super helpful.
So Josh also says he doesn't see this as an incremental step to longer support. I think you articulated though that it does, and down in like bullet 2 right now on alternatives, longer support change, e.g. 2 or 5 years. This is hard to implement in the current context of the project's practices. In addition, all the work detailed here would be required anyway before this option could be implemented. That
I think the change is not just extending but changing. I think that's where we would say, okay, making any kind of change to the existing support cadence. That is the incremental step. You're not just extending. Even if you had to minimize or if you had to make it a monthly cadence, or even then you had to do the particular tasks that we had decided.
Mm.
I'm also not sure how actionable Josh's comment, so the second comment, from my perspective, this proposal asserts that there's some large body of users who are poorly served by our current 9-month window, but would be well served by a 12-month window. Yet the proposal does not identify who these users are, and they're not the users I work with, so I'm questioning whether such users actually exist. I'm not sure how we could counter that with, like, from an anonymized survey. Like, we'd have to have a list of usernames. He would have to believe that those users were meaningful users.
Yeah, I mean, like it kind of feels that maybe the right way to talk about that is to talk about like the experience reports rather than the survey data. You know, like,
I think though also even in that, like for any experience report that would support this, he will have an experience report that shows the opposite. And I think that goes back to what maybe we haven't treated sufficiently in the text, that the responses were bimodal. And we're looking to address one of those modes where he's focused on the other.
Okay. So yeah, that's actually a really good point. That we don't like. I think one of the big problems with the document at the moment is that we still haven't. There's quite a few to-dos in there that are like talk more about the actual results. That sort of is that's the key thing, I think, is that that we need to actually talk more about the results and saying, overall the results are bimodal. The results of the survey were bimodal, and this is an attempt to, sort of hit one of those modes, but we're not doing anything about the other one.
And the result, and when we were actually doing the survey, we knew that the results won't just pop out saying, okay, these are the 3 things you got to do. It was always going to be something that is derived from the results, rather than something that says, okay, here is a graph that says this is a big bar and everybody falls here. So it's going to be more deductive than, and our questions are also very cryptic. We didn't want to say, do you want LTS? But we wanted to figure out that, what users actually were facing, what were the situations they were in. And we saw that they were in older ones. So I think that's, we could add it somewhere in the doc, explaining who this target audience is, but I think we do that. We kind of say the target audience who is, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess so. I guess the thing there is like, who's best to write something that sums up what we just said. Oh,
I'm trying to put something for a comment there in the comment thread, but I do think we need to pull that bimodalness also into the document somehow out of the thread. The thread, at some point, this thread needs to result in something for words in the doc, yeah. But I don't know that we're quite there in the discussion thread yet.
Yeah.
I'm actually reading through the doc right now. I woke up with a lot of conversation there.
I feel like the thing that we need to keep in mind though is that this time that we have now is really the last time before it's going to be effective, before it's going to be the contributor summit. And so, yeah, we need to make sure we don't, that we make the most of the slightly higher bandwidth communication.
Yes, and we could meet if we have any, thing to discuss. If someone has an agenda, or hey, we finished the document, it looks more complete. Let's sync up.
Yeah.
The week before KubeCon is gonna be tough, but I think next week might be easier. But yeah, let's see.
I guess the other thing that we could talk about maybe is you've got two sort of comments there, Tim, about the deprecation policy and the version skew policy.
Yeah, as I was trying to summarize that, I came back to realizing that maybe we hadn't actually reached a clear consensus on what we thought on that.
I do, like, reading those comments, it sort of made me think, like, if you're going to be able to upgrade effectively once a year, it would kind of suck to have the deprecation period be 9 months and be like, you upgrade your once a year, and it's like, and then a whole bunch of stuff just breaks because you missed the whole deprecation cycle.
Yeah, it's 12 months plus 2, so the 12 months, the existing one doesn't work already.
Yeah, true, yeah.
So I think we will have to extend. We'll have to talk about extending that. So the deprecation policy says 12 months after it is stable. That's one of the, the API review, the API policy is different. The feature policy is different. The time periods are different for both of them. So we should probably say if I started something in alpha and I stayed at least one release, because it has to come in a release to be called as an alpha, and it goes for 6 months more. I'm just giving like a case where it says goes to beta and then it goes to stable. So it goes to, in next 3 months it goes to beta, and in next 3 months it goes to stable. That was 9 months of period of that API where it changed, but it was there. And then you need 1 year for that support. That is already 19 months. 9 plus 12, 21 months. So you already had that much of period. So we'll have to, once it gets released, if you're adding 2 more months. But once you announce something as deprecated, what do? Do you upgrade to a version of release where it still exists,
Yeah.
to continue to use it? You have an option of not upgrading to the yearly release version, but you can go one version back and still use it,
Mm.
and then plan for its deprecation. Because the releases are every 3 months, in that
Yeah.
12 months, you will have 3 other releases that will still be using it. And if you wanted to update to the one of them, you can always continue to use it.
Mm.
But yeah, the GA period has to move from 12 months to 14 months for sure.
Yeah.
So I partly wonder if they don't exactly. So thinking about how a user interfaces with this stuff today, it's marginally suboptimal, and that so in either today or this proposal, somebody must visit each release in their upgrade path.
Mm.
And that part isn't changed. And as they do that, they need to, for whatever criteria they have, evaluate their usage of Kubernetes relative to what's in the new release. And people get surprised, and also bugs exist. There's a lot of things that are not GA today upon which people depend, but that means they could arbitrarily go away at a shorter cadence. I feel like the conflict that we're concerned about already exists today unaddressed. Now, it would be good to address it, it would be better to address it, but I wonder if we're putting an unrealistic expectation on ourselves or on the project here versus the variables that somebody would already need to manage actively somehow themselves. And that's very hand wavy on purpose, sadly. Like there's this hard task that the user operator has today, and I don't know that this truly changes it.
I think the other data point that might be relevant is the sort of the user experience reports around the 1.16 release, and the removal of the old beta APIs for the GA, for the things that are now GA. I mean, that's been a very big deal for people. I've seen a lot of people.
Can you imagine those people, that class of people today who's delaying as long as they can, so 9 plus some months between their upgrades? They've got a lot of surprises. Throwing 3 more months on there doesn't, I wonder how much that substantially changes their surprise level and how they have to actively manage in the face of that today.
Yeah, I think one thing is that we haven't trained or we haven't followed up a good pattern or habit with our customers where we actually move from beta to stable fast enough so that they don't actually use beta APIs. If you're using beta APIs, you should probably expect. Right now, we are talking about deprecation policy for beta APIs.
Yes,
To be
we are.
longer, and we only want to talk about GA in this document. We want to say alpha and beta stay as it is. We cannot rely on it. It's GA that is going to go from 12 to 14 months. So if we are also talking about, hey, the beta needs to stay for 12 months, that's a pretty heavy thing on the project.
Yeah. No, I guess the point that I was trying to make was not that I don't think that we should change the beta API windows. It's the thing that I think is more important is that the fact that those beta APIs have been deprecated. I think it's the first time when there's been a serious level of deprecation for things that people are actually using. And so the experience reports are useful insofar as they, this is the first time that we've got a field experiment where people are actually needing to, having to do upgrades and having a problem when they're doing an upgrade where they can't just go where they're actually needing to do stuff and they don't, they haven't liked it because it's the first time. And I think it does point up, interestingly, I think it points up a problem with the idea of just picking a supported version, is that if we just pick a supported version and mark it as LTS, then this problem is going to be exponentially worse, because the longer you leave that supported version, the bigger, the delta, the delta of this sort of thing is going to get a lot worse, not just a little bit worse. And that's one of the reasons when we talked about it, I seem to remember that we sort of said, we can't just pick an LTS version because the project is changing, so it's still changing. Like
Project's not ready for it yet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the way to say it, is that the project is not ready for it yet because too much stuff is changing.
And this goes back to your reply to Josh saying like this is part of the maturation process to get possibly towards what he and his customer set are looking for.
Yeah, but I guess I guess I'm still trying to come up with a way to answer his question, because it is a fair question, right? Like it's a fair question, and to say like, why don't we just pick a version and call it LTS and call it done? And I think that this discussion around the deprecation policy and the upgrade process is really important. Like you can't have a 2 or a 5 year LTS and then have when you upgrade from that LTS to the next LTS, you need to, it's not one upgrade, it's like 15 upgrades because you've got to go through all the versions in the 5-year window. It's like that would be a very sucky user experience.
I agree. I think with deprecation policies, I seriously think that we have been spoiling our users by supporting beta for too long. Many APIs are in beta for so long that users just end up using it. And once you move them, even if you put a GA one, that means you want to get rid of the beta ones at some point, and users are still there. There's also lack of a compare check tool that actually tells you, hey, I'm having this cluster and upgrading to this one. Is this gonna fail? There should be some kind of a tool that just goes and looks at all your objects and says, okay, you're using all these objects, they won't exist from tomorrow.
Yeah.
Because that's your running cluster. You have all the objects in the etcd that says, okay, you're using all these APIs and they won't exist from tomorrow. So this is gonna break. For some of the things like what component config and API versioning scheme, both of these categories of versioning, they are easier to check, and I think that tool is what is missing. Maybe we can hint in this document somewhere saying that, okay, maybe providing that kind of a document is going to help those customers who will know that they are going to break when a new version comes out, and they could run it independently. But I think this kind of uses, like you said, if you have 5 years or 2 years, no matter what support you have, you're always going to be deprecating something. And users of those deprecation, if they do not understand how beta and alpha deprecations work, they are going to still they're going to still suffer with the breakage. So that's one of the things that the project will have to always live with in some ways, right?
Hi, I'm Mark. I've been lurking for a while on this discussion. I guess one thing that has come to mind for me is, the question of whether, supporting every upgrade scenario seems very difficult for this LTS project. And my question is I would think that folks that really care about LTS or have a business need to upgrade once a year or whatever would be willing to go to some extremes to be able to, have supported use for a year and be able to easily move. And my question is like in the blue-green cluster upgrade case, where you stand up an entirely new cluster and transition all of your Kubernetes objects over to that, if I at least had a support period for a year on the release that I was running and could upgrade for security fixes in production and things like that, if that mechanism for doing the blue-green upgrade was more straightforward, or I could actually move my service IPs or load balancer IPs and things like that easily to this new cluster and things like that, maybe that's the model that is a subset of all of the Kubernetes use cases that might be more easily to support in the LTS version.
I feel like that's a notable gap. This would be easier if there was some standard tooling and methods that were the norm out there today for that blue-green control plane rollout and rollback as well in the failure case.
Yeah, I think part of the thing that makes this really hard is that there's no standard way to do this. Everybody does it differently. I agree.
And that's why I think this is an incremental step, that making some kind of change to the support policy that looks seemingly in the direction of the evolution. Let's see what are we going to face. We are changing the deprecation policy now, and we are discussing, and we are seeing so many issues. The SKU versions, we are understanding what's going to impact that if you reduce or increase the support period. So that's why I think this is incremental and makes sense.
So Mark, though, brings up a question I hadn't quite done the math on. Version SKU strategy, I think we almost have to increment. If you're doing that blue-green deployment, you could have parts of your control plane interacting with things that are n+3 instead of n+2. Or you would.
If you look at the component changes, we do talk about expand support for SKU for 3 releases instead of 2, the first one. And the idea there was to, I think in one of the meetings, Jordan had mentioned that we will have to increase the version SKU by 1.
Yeah, I think we have to, and this was the reasoning why.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, that version SKU strategy section needs to change then, Tim, to reflect the. I had missed that. Nice pick up, double.
Yeah, and it would be like currently you have some. I think it's the kubectl and API server SKU where you actually say the kubectl works with -1 and -2. That means API server works with the newer version of a client or older version of a client. So that's n-1 and n+1. Now when you have a 2 version support, do you go to n-2 or do you go to n+2? So those are some of the minor things that needs to be understood. But I think Jordan has did speak about what to do there. But
Yeah.
I think one of the mentions was we should take this to the SIG and get it sorted for there, because that's their responsibility. They have the best, not responsibility, but the best expertise on what makes sense there.
Yeah, so I think it's reasonable for us to say it feels like probably like we guess that we will need to do that, but we're not sure.
Yeah, and the same thing goes to the other SIGs exactly. I think the KEP is proposing yearly support model, and some of those minute changes of where things go will be decided by the SIGs when those are like implementation details versus how do you upgrade your cluster today. And when I say cluster, I don't mean the workloads on it.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think practically, I think the only supported way to do 3 or 4 upgrades today is that you've got to go, control plane upgrade, node upgrade, control plane upgrade, node upgrade, control plane upgrade, node upgrade.
Yep.
You can't sort of just do the control plane upgrades and then do the node upgrades if you're doing in place. I think Mark, your point is super fair about doing a blue-green one, and I hadn't really thought about that possibility either too much. I think that in general, when we've been talking about this, we have been talking about in-place upgrades rather than like a blue-green cluster upgrade process.
Well, yeah, and particular also for blue-green, I may be even saying something more extreme, which is imagine a blue-green upgrade where I stand up all new nodes, all new control plane, and all I'm looking to do is have support for, a cluster for a long time. And then I will transition over to a whole new cluster, brand new hardware, brand new, nodes, brand new Kubernetes control plane. And my impression right now is that the hard part of that, beyond like Kubernetes object, version deprecation, dealing with those hassles, but assuming users can deal with those issues, then my impression is that the hard part is, switching the networking over in an atomic way from one cluster to the next. for any like externally accessible services and things like that. But I guess I'm just been absorbing all of this LTS discussion for a long time, and it feels like very hard problem. And I'm wondering if by constraining it to blue-green or even the most extreme version of blue-green, does that kind of limit the problem in a way that you can say, as long as we had support for a year, this is a design path for users to do their upgrade process where they can have support, but they need to do this for their networking. They need to stand up a whole new cluster. There are all these caveats, but you can not have to do a major version, or a minor version upgrade, for a year.
Mm.
The testing that we do today, Lubomir, since you are here, you could use your expertise. Does it do blue-green, or does it do in place, or what kind of testing we do today?
It's like everything is in place, I think.
Yeah. I think that's one of the biggest concerns is when we release Kubernetes and we say, hey, this is the new version of Kubernetes, we actually test in place upgrades and not blue-green. I think we had this discussion in the past where we discussed upgrades.
So if it's in place and you're going from version N to N+1, do you actually need to change the version skew strategy? It seems like that would only be necessary if you chose to not upgrade some parts of your cluster as you went into N+1.
So the reason why you need support is because your clients are sitting still on older versions. And it's the communication between the kubectl and similar clients that are talking to your cluster, or the services that are running inside using the APIs. So that's why you needed those skewed versions. Yeah. So if you see the second point, the kubectl and API service queue, that's where it comes from.
Yeah. So by kubectl, you also mean
Clients.
So
Yeah.
clients in general. So client Go, client whatever language you're using. As someone who's now working primarily on the thing that consumes the API, it is one of the things that is tricky about doing like Kubernetes support upgrades and is that which version of Kubernetes do you say that you support as a client when the and the way that the clients currently work doesn't make that easy for you. Like if you are using, because it's proto and statically typed, if you are using the client to say run an ingress controller, which is what I'm doing, and ingress v1 beta 1 gets deprecated, and you try to have your controller listen for v1 beta 1, and you are now in a cluster that doesn't have it anymore because, say, somebody has done the right thing and disabled beta APIs so that they can get ready for when it's actually removed, then the client is not happy and will log a lot of errors about it. I'm not saying that this is something we need to address. It's just like there's another point there where the version skew can mess with you, that in a way that you might not expect when you're just thinking about the control plane.
There have been discussions with API machineries related to basically this problem where you can have the API server running and you feed it objects, and if it doesn't recognize an object, if it's going to fail basically, but there is no way to convert your workloads locally on disk. And this proposal has seen objections. The general proposal is to allow components, like let's say the controller manager, to expose CLI to convert objects. So if you have this intermediate step to convert your objects and then send them to the new cluster, you can assure that they are just going to work. But currently this, like I'm saying, this is seen opposition.
Yeah, I think there could also be the compact check again, which actually you can run against the older cluster and say what objects are going to fail when I say compact check 1.17, and it's going to point to the cluster and say these objects, these API endpoints are no longer supported. So you would be prepared to say, okay, this is what I need to change. And then the tool that Lubomir is talking about, saying that, okay, let me use that tool to convert these objects and see how they look like.
It's not a single tool. It's basically
Yeah.
we were proposing that each component, including something like the kubelet, can expose CLI tools to convert objects.
Should we not say that this is something that we think, and maybe this is not a goal that we want to define this in this KEP, because the KEP is, I mean, the question that we are trying to answer here is something that could come up when others are participating in this discussion. But should the KEP be focusing on this?
So
should the KEP be trying to answer these questions?
I feel like it is, like, strictly speaking, they're orthogonal, that these are common needs that the project has today. But if, depending on the reaction people have to this, the general concept of the KEP, were they present today, they would probably ease ease folks' digestion of this KEP proposal. Lacking them becomes a pain point. Having them would be beneficial, even though they are not strictly related to the KEP itself, but existing problem today.
Yep. Yeah. So you say we should cover it in the KEP somewhere?
I think we need to mention the fact that we've talked about it at least somehow, even if we say non-goal, or that if there's a in the further work section that says things that we've talked about that we acknowledge would be useful but that aren't directly in line for this KEP are compatibility checker.
Compat check and version conversion and point to the
and a version converter, that sort of thing. Those things would be very useful, and would be very useful both in the case that we don't extend the support window and in the case that we do. Like, it's useful regardless.
Yeah.
But if you extend the support window, then it'll be more useful than it would be in the current state.
You make a good point there, and I can extract that straw here, that no matter what kind of policy you have, you're always going to have this problem. So even if you stay in the current state, when you're upgrading a cluster, you have this problem.
And I think it comes back to one of the things that is super valuable about us doing this effort is that asking the question, what if we, and this sort of comes back to my belief about why we should put this KEP forward, is that just asking the question, what if we did this, has exposed so many things that we kind of all hadn't thought about a bit, but just spending the time to think about, if we did do that, what would that actually mean, is a very useful exercise. And has, even if we put the proposal forward and everyone spends some time thinking about it and we decide that it's actually too much work or something like that, that's actually okay, because the effort that we put into to just think about the problem and define the problem is actually bringing up a whole bunch of things that are worthwhile for the project to do, whether or not this ends up completing.
I think we should mention this in the KEP somewhere, saying that this problem, we have discussed it, but we recognize that this is a problem of the project overall, irrespective of whether you change the cadence or not. And
no matter what option, or no matter what we choose to do, the very act of investigating this problem has exposed a whole bunch of things that really need to happen regardless of what option we choose.
Yeah, that needs to be kind of make sure that the discussions don't get derailed on this KEP based on those discussions, because those discussions still need to happen outside, and that's why they happen. I mean, the thing that Lubomir is mentioning, that, hey, we have discussed this and we are trying to get a consensus there, and that is because irrespective of whether cadence changes or not, the current cadence itself has this issue.
And I guess so in my mind, one of the other things that we really need to address soon is, like, working groups are supposed to be time limited. Like, we really, like, by the ideal of a working group, this working group should be really, like, doing something or wrapping up, right? And you know, it feels to me like this is a big enough problem that it's actually, you know, that doing something is difficult because there's so many moving parts, so many moving things, and that we need to make sure that people understand that even though, you know, even though they don't want to do the yearly support, you know, the extending the support window, that even just asking the questions has been valuable enough that we probably need to keep the working group going to invest, like to keep sort of asking these questions and having that work spin off into other things.
So that wasn't strictly on the agenda, but that's a good thing for us to mention or to discuss. Should the working group continue into 2020? It's sounding like Nick's saying yes. What are other people's thoughts?
I think we need to jot down these discussions in a broader document that we have. We have a summary document.
Yeah, the summary document of where the working group is at is probably the right place
and
to
put those 5 different areas that which are much more clearer this year than we were last year. So last year we started the survey, we started discussions around, you know, charter, we started discussion on what this group should target at, what should be the action, what should be the time period, and we gave ourselves a time period and said, okay, this is the time period we think we can achieve all of this. Now we have much more clearer understanding of what this group needs to do. And we should also look at, can this group be a sub-projected? You know, is there a way where this group can take some work apart from discussions, like write that compact check tool or work with a SIG to get that compact. You know, we are supposed to be cross SIG and get sub projects in those SIGs to address the concerns that we're talking about in this and the SCEPs that we are generating. So we should probably find a way also to address those issues by doing some work, because by definition, the working group has work in it. We are supposed to be only coming up with a recommendation, with a CAP, with a document, and not actually write code or own a code or own a repo or start a new project on this one. So that's something that we should look at.
I think that Josh is making some valid points in terms of how the community is going to react to this, especially the developers. I saw mention that Tim, you already brought this discussion to SIG release, because SIG release is going to be quite involved in this extended period of time. How did the discussion go?
I'd say about the same. It's bimodal. There's plenty of people who are worried, oh, this is a huge incremental cost, but the cost hasn't actually been defined. Today, we don't know what it costs in terms of test infra. I'm one of the few people now who has a sense of the human cost, having done for about 10 months now the patch release process. From the patch release side, like bringing code in, this is almost a no-op to add. So a year, if we look at it just from a year versus 9 month support, or if we say like a year practically means adding a 4th release that's in support in parallel, the majority of the patches that come through are proposed on almost all branches. So we already have the toil of tracking those in 3 places. So adding another one, it's like, it's the way we operate, it's almost nothing there. So it's totally containable. On the flip side though, there's like I think kind of like what Josh is expressing, that this fear that like this is gonna, like we have a ton of toil right now, this is gonna incrementally make the toil worse. We're barely surviving today, we will not be able to survive then. I don't see that as quantified. There is also some work, Stephen Augustus and I were talking about how we can quantify some of this cost. Right now, the test infrastructure cost, the actual dollars cost, that's really hard to see because it's all just sort of magically within Google. And we don't know what it is, but that also like, that's preventing us from having more feature branches, which would be a beneficial thing to have just from a development perspective. We can't just arbitrarily spin up testing on a branch. And that's what this should mean. Like, we just want one more branch. We should, if we're doing collaborative open source long-term development well, in my opinion, we would have the ability to easily just add and remove branches from some reasonable set of test coverage. Like this is how GitHub and CI workflows work today. But we're a big project, we require large clusters, it's complicated, we've kind of painted ourselves maybe into a corner there. I think that it's tractable for us to define some subset of tests that are relevant on branches and that we need to then understand how much those cost. So Stephen and I have been plotting, as we transition from the Google infrastructure to CNCF, and as we're prototyping that, we have an idea over the coming weeks or month or so to actually try and quantify what a portion of the release cost is on the new infrastructure, where we get to see the dollar value. So between network storage and compute, we could get a dollar value on branched CI for release. And then we'd be able to say, okay, right now we spend X dollars for 4 branches support because there's master and the 3 patches. To add one more, worst case, it should be 25%, right? But I expect it's much less than that because the amount of testing we have on master branch is huge. It should dwarf the testing that happens on the other 4. So this is an incremental, I'm going to guess, 10% cost.
And the 4th release is the last. It does not get as much testing and as many new patches.
The patch release branches all get the same amount of testing. There's a set of test CI that happens the same on each of them. Now, if master is constantly adding new end-to-end tests, and some of those are promoted to blocking tests, it may be that current master and N-1 have more E2E tests than N-3. It's a little hard to tell on that, and there is a push to increase that as opposed to decrease it, where I guess some decreases maybe have been spotted by steering in terms of coverage. So it's a multi-dimensional equation. It's not small or trivial to compute, but we can look at some real dollars right now. And we have no idea, like, are we spending 10,000, or is Google spending $10,000 a year on our behalf per release branch? Or is it 100? Or like, what is the number? But if we have that number and we're on the CNCF infrastructure, we can say, hey, community, hey, friends, I can go to my employer and say, hey, VMware, if this is beneficial to us, the total incremental for the community is X dollars. Could we contribute a portion of that? Amazon just made a public commitment a week or 2 ago about credits as well for open source testing on their infrastructure. Like, I think there is an ability to fund the portion of this that's causing that fear today. So I'm not super concerned about that. I think we'd have to, there's like an action plan that needs to roll out here, but I think we can manage that.
So maybe there's also requirement for buy-in from SIG testing, because SIG testing already has a lot of Google people that I'm pretty sure some of them can already tell you some of these numbers.
We've asked, and we've not been able to get it. I don't know if this is because people aren't actually connected to it, it's just magic-free happening enabled stuff, or if it's Google internal confidential that they're unable to share with us. Either way, I don't see us getting it. I've been asking for quite a while on a variety of fronts around this test infra Google internal stuff, and kind of gotten the message that the info is not going to come. And the solution realistically is that we build out the replacement. The working group Kate's Infra is working on that. It's providing a path to getting real cost estimates with granularity on each of the things that we do. That's going to be a trailing thing, though. It's going to happen over the next year. It makes it hard to inform a choice today on something like this KEP.
Maybe some people are going to block this proposal using this blocking function, like until we have CNCF infrastructure, we cannot do this change.
Yeah, it's quite possible.
I mean, it's probably marking. I think it's fair to say, like, marking in the document, known blockers for this change to complete or something like that might be. Again, part of the point of that sort of thing is to sort of forestall. But what about? But what about discussions? And if we could, the more I think there's enough to discuss here that the more. But what about? Discussions we can forestall, the better off we're going to be.
Also, if you remember what Jordan said, you can always, if you agree with this idea, you can always say yes today, and by the time you reach the 4th release, you would have solved some of these problems.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
the point is not about whether you have enough money to do this, because if you see that there are avenues to do it, you're making a big change. You need to either commit or you don't. So if we have to fight the inhibition whether you for the change. If we think that this is, even if from the people who are saying that this is too small a change, if you can't make a small change, and even if that small change is coming up with all these action items, then no change can be made. So that's something that we need to look at.
I also think that, like we've talked a bunch about today, that the act of going and cataloging these things and proposing and saying, this is something that people want, that in itself is driving change, or it's helping inform change. And I guess we're not going to end up having time to talk about it, but I think Jordan's kept last week that's linked there in the agenda is a huge example of that. That would have probably been happening anyway. There's an effort out of steering over the last year to improve conformance related things. It's an area that Jordan's obviously passionate about, and that's part of why he's engaged here as well. Like, these things dovetail together. So the more voices talking about these things, asking for, exploring, means that we get more visibility, we get more inertia. Change is happening, where if the stuff is untalked about, the change doesn't happen anywhere near as quickly, even if it's going slowly today.
Yes, and I like this cap because it says enhancement, ensure conformance tests do not require beta APIs or features. It kind of is trying to say, as a release, we don't talk about, as a conformance, we don't talk about beta features or beta APIs. And as support cadence, we need to do that too, I think, and the cap that says that we don't to talk about how long we're going to support GA, but beta needs to be time boxed somewhere. That says beta is, if it's not time boxed, and it's not, don't depend on it, and don't complain about it. But if you're using beta, then you'll have to find ways to do it. And you can start a project that says, okay, let's have a compat check and support check for beta. But I don't think as a project, Kubernetes can focus on beta features. And the SCEP is kind of saying the same thing. Conformance tests can't be based on beta features. Am I right in interpretation, Tim?
Well, they are today, and that would be something that we don't want to happen. And once things are cleaned, we would want to ensure that that doesn't regress. But this also goes back to all of the discussion we were just having a bit ago about deprecation and skew and upgrade. Like, the more of these APIs that are stable and then have that stable GA support in the deprecation policy, the easier it becomes for people to use a cluster that's older and successfully move to a cluster that's dramatically newer. So like these all end up intertwined. So one thing I want to circle back to, Josh's comments about the mode of people who want longer support terms, that mode really just wants long-term support, 2-5 years level. Do folks think that can be like, like Nick and I feel like talked about that being a potential further step after this? Like, this could be a first demonstration point, but from an operational perspective, like, and maybe calling out Dhaval and Mark, but also Nick, I guess a little bit from your experience running things as well. Do you see customers thinking annual upgrade, that whatever, that is small, I guess
Yeah.
is what I'm trying to say.
From my point of view, I think that people are like, there are people who are going to want that, and that like that's them bringing their, I don't touch my Windows NT4 boxes until I absolutely have to mentality forward. And I think that like it's kind of like, if you're trying to do cloud native stuff with that sort of attitude, you're going to run into so many problems that it's kind of worth, like, that we almost want to put like barriers in people's way to be like, are you really sure you want to do that? Like I feel like it's not actually something to encourage. Like that they're going to have so many more problems about, with lots of things that are not just the control plane, but they're going to have so many more problems about, you're going to have such a multi-dimensional support matrix problem staying out for that long that it just boggles my mind to even consider what you'd have to do for the actual upgrade. Like that is an exponential problem.
I'm aware of 2 time periods that make sense for a lot of customers. One is the yearly cadence, to go around business cycles. And then the other is, a lot of customers have 3-year hardware leases, and they lease their hardware. And so when they lease their hardware for 3 years, a lot of customers are looking for, to install an OS or something on them that they can update, for 3 years. And then after 3 years, they migrate to new hardware and they just throw away whatever they had before. And so I don't know. I personally don't know of a 5-year use case other than, there are the people that are running in, kind of more embedded type systems, or running in automobiles, or, tanks or missile launchers or whatever,
We haven't had the IBMers show up with their mainframe use case, right?
Yeah. So, but for most enterprise customers, I'm aware of the 1 year and the 3 year because of the hardware lease cycle.
Right. Again, I guess a lot of us who are working closely on the project are stuck with thinking about doing this in a cloud where the hardware is not a problem.
I think when it also depends on the workloads that are running on the cluster, and how many workloads are running on this cluster, how many tenants are running on this cluster, how big is the cluster. So if the cluster is very big, I would take a lot of time just to upgrade. It takes me 1 year to just upgrade. In blue-green scenario, I want something to be long so that I can move all my workloads to a new version without having a downtime for that particular cluster. Yeah, I think there is there are kind of workloads that require long, but I think the KEP is trying to address a particular problem that is not probably covered for people who want 5-year support. Say, I'm sure there will be someone like IoT segment that will require 5-year support. Your device is at the bottom of the ocean and you need to do something about that.
Yeah.
I haven't heard that Kubernetes is at the bottom of the ocean yet. Well, we're at the end of the hour. I've been trying to capture some of these also in a few places within the draft document, and I see the folks have been keeping things in the notes going as well. So as with the meeting 2 weeks ago, we need to try and do some final tightening on this asynchronously, a little more active in chat on Slack, and see where we can get this, if we can get it to a place where we can do a little bit of SIG socialization ahead of Contributor Summit. Otherwise, that'll be a key place to do so.
Yeah. I think in my mind, one of the big advantages to get out of sort of talking about this a bit more at Summit is to bring people who don't have a lot of bandwidth to keep up with the discussion sort of up to the speed of the point that, hey, we're actually this is the thing that we're talking about, suggesting as a way to sort of get something actually happening here. What I'm thinking about steering an architecture where all the people involved are so ridiculously busy that they're not going to be keeping up with our notes or anything like that, right? And that the Contributor Summit is the time when we can grab some of their attention.
You remind me that I think we are scheduled Oh, no, we're not. I was thinking we were conflicting. That was in the initial, yeah. So we're not at the same time as the steering or architecture stuff on the agenda for Contrib Summit. So that's a good thing.
That's very good. That's very good. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think during the KubeCon we'll have not just the contributor summit, but other days where we can actually converse and discuss with all kinds of audience to convince and to learn. I think both would be there to influence and to learn. So I think we want people to be aware of the challenges and why this is important and why what are the challenges and why this is more of a pragmatic solution rather than idealistic. Anyways, we already
All right.
crossed 10
Yep.
p.m.
I will make sure that this gets uploaded to the to YouTube. I forgot to mention up front the code of conduct. I appreciate everybody adhering to that during the meeting. It was a recorded meeting, and we'll see you all in 2 weeks, and hopefully a bunch on Slack and Google Docs in the meantime.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks, bud.
Bye, Tim.
Cheers.